In the dense, sun-dappled jungle, the once powerful and graceful elephant, Kavi, lay motionless on the forest floor, his massive form unnaturally still. His eyes flickered, filled with a mixture of confusion and pain. The earth around him was splattered with mud, blood, and sweat. The sound of his heavy breathing echoed through the air as he struggled to stay conscious. He had been struck by an unseen danger, an injury so severe that it had rendered him helpless, unable to even rise from the ground. His companions, a group of elephants, stood around him, their trunks raised in anxious calls. The mighty herd had no leader now, and their anxious trumpets pierced the otherwise silent forest. Ramesh, a young wildlife conservationist, rushed towards Kavi, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hold on, Kavi," he whispered, his voice shaky but filled with determination. He knelt by the elephant's side, gently placing his hand on the massive body. The elephant's large ear twitched in response. Ramesh wiped the sweat from his brow, cursing the lack of a proper treatment facility nearby. With only his basic medical knowledge and the supplies in his backpack, he was unsure whether he could save Kavi, but he knew he had to try. The forest was silent, except for the faint rustle of leaves, as Ramesh worked swiftly. He knew that time was running out. Each passing moment could mean the difference between life and death for the magnificent creature lying before him. The tension in the air was palpable. The elephants watched in hushed concern, and Ramesh's heart raced as he examined the injury. It was a deep gash in Kavi's side, caused by a sharp object, perhaps a trap or an ancient weapon long abandoned. Blood had soaked the earth beneath him, and it was clear that without intervention, the damage could prove fatal. But there was no time for panic. Ramesh quickly reached for his first aid kit, his mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. His hands trembled as he cleaned the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. The elephant's breathing was shallow but steady. As Ramesh worked, he couldn't help but notice the sadness in Kavi's eyes. They were filled with more than just pain. There was fear too. Fear of what would happen next. Ramesh took a deep breath and steadied his shaking hands. "We can do this, Kavi," he whispered, as though the words could somehow bring strength to both of them. The sun set behind them, casting long shadows through the trees, but the battle for Kavi's life was just beginning. As Ramesh worked tirelessly to stop the bleeding, he found himself battling not only Kavi's injury, but also his own mounting fears. The elephant's breathing was shallow, and Ramesh could feel the strength draining from his massive body. Each breath Kavi took seemed harder than the last. Ramesh wiped the sweat from his brow, his mind racing with thoughts of what would happen if he couldn't save the great animal. Would Kavi's life end here, in the middle of the jungle, with no one but a young conservationist to stand witness? The weight of the situation pressed down on him like the very earth beneath them. Despite the odds, Ramesh refused to give up. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a syringe filled with painkillers. "This will help," he muttered to himself. But he knew that painkillers alone wouldn't solve the problem. There were deeper, more critical wounds to treat. The injury had struck at Kavi's heart, the place where his strength and will to survive lay. But Kavi wasn't just a wild animal. He was a symbol of resilience. In the years Ramesh had spent studying elephants, he had learned to see beyond their enormous size and strength. They were creatures capable of incredible healing, both physically and emotionally. The young conservationist took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "You're not alone, Kavi," he whispered, placing a gentle hand on the elephant's ear. His voice trembled, but his resolve was strong. "I won't leave you. Not now, not ever." Ramesh turned back to the wound, gathering his strength to take the next step. He worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced precision, as he sutured the deep cut. The blood continued to flow, but Ramesh refused to let the despair take hold. Every stitch was a reminder that there was still hope. Hope that Kavi could make it through this, that he could rise again. The silence of the jungle weighed heavily on Ramesh as he worked, the soft rhythmic sound of Kavi's shallow breaths being the only break in the otherwise still air. As he continued stitching the wound, he couldn't help but reflect on the immense bond that had formed between humans and elephants over the years. The elephants weren't just animals, They were sentient beings with emotions, memories, and the ability to grieve. They understood loss, just as Ramesh understood the weight of his task. Ramesh paused for a moment, his hands trembling, as he wiped away more sweat. He glanced over at the herd of elephants, standing at a respectful distance. Their eyes were locked onto Kavi, their trunks lowered in a sign of solemn understanding. They knew what was at stake. They knew the value of the life that lay in front of them. It was as if they were waiting for a signal, unsure whether Kavi would survive this ordeal or succumb to the darkness of his injury. The wind shifted slightly, rustling the leaves above them. The temperature was cooling as the sun began its descent. It was an unusually still evening, the air heavy with anticipation. Ramesh could feel the weight of the jungle around him, almost as if the very trees were holding their breath. There was so much at risk. "Kavi, you're strong," Ramesh whispered softly, more to reassure himself than the animal. He couldn't afford to lose faith now. The bond between a human and such a magnificent creature could not be severed so easily. He had to believe in Kavi's strength to overcome this injury, and he had to believe in his own ability to help. As he finished suturing the wound, Ramesh stepped back to assess the damage. Kavi's breathing was steadier now, but the elephant remained motionless, his body still trembling with the weight of the injury. Ramesh took a moment to steady his own breath. There was a long road ahead, but the first step had been taken. Hope, fragile but alive, flickered in Ramesh's heart. Hours passed, and the light from the sun gradually faded, giving way to a starry night sky above the jungle. The temperature dropped, and Ramesh could feel the weariness creeping into his bones. Yet he refused to rest. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands ached from the constant effort of attending to Kavi's injury. But there was no time to rest. Not yet. Not until Kavi could stand on his own again. With the herd gathered close by, Ramesh began to administer fluids to Kavi through an IV, hoping to replenish some of the strength he had lost. Kavi's eyes were closed now, the pain medication working to numb the worst of the agony. But the injury was grave, and the elephant's body had already been weakened by the loss of so much blood. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves from the surrounding forest broke the silence. Ramesh froze, his heart racing. He looked around cautiously. The herd tensed as well, their ears flapping nervously, trunks raised. Something was approaching. Ramesh's eyes narrowed, scanning the underbrush for any sign of danger. His mind raced, unsure of what he should do. He couldn't leave Kavi now. The tension in the air was palpable, and Ramesh felt the weight of the situation settle deeper into his chest. Who, or what, was coming? His hand instinctively gripped the medical kit at his side. The trees swayed slightly in the breeze, but there was still no movement in the jungle. Ramesh slowly stood up, moving cautiously around Kavi to position himself in a way that could protect the animal if needed. The rustling in the forest continued, getting closer. But the shadows held their secrets tightly. Ramesh could only wait and watch, hoping that whatever was coming, it would not be another threat to Kavi's life. A figure emerged from the darkness, stepping cautiously into the clearing. It was another human, but not one Ramesh had expected to see. Dr. Priya, a renowned wildlife veterinarian and Ramesh's mentor, stood before him, her face illuminated by the soft moonlight. She had arrived just in time, her presence a beacon of hope amidst the uncertainty. "Ramesh, I heard you were in trouble," Dr. Priya said, her voice calm but filled with concern. She quickly surveyed the scene, noting the gravity of Kavi's condition. "You've done well so far, but now we need to act fast. This injury is far worse than we initially thought." Ramesh sighed in relief, his tension ebbing as he recognized the familiar voice of his mentor. "Priya, I didn't know who else to turn to. Kavi, he's not out of the woods yet." His voice trailed off, filled with both exhaustion and determination. Dr. Priya knelt beside Kavi, assessing the elephant's wound with the expertise of someone who had dedicated their life to healing the wild. "We'll get through this, Ramesh, but we need to stabilize him before we can transport him to a proper facility," she said, her tone decisive. Ramesh watched as Dr. Priya worked, a mix of gratitude and awe flooding his chest. With her knowledge and skills, the hope that Kavi could survive this injury seemed more tangible. Together, they could save him. The night stretched on as Ramesh and Dr. Priya continued their work under the canopy of stars. Kavi's condition had stabilized for the moment, but Ramesh couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The herd had stayed close, their quiet trumpets echoing through the jungle. Every sound seemed amplified, creating an atmosphere of tension and urgency. Dr. Priya worked with precision, her years of experience reflected in every movement. She was calm, focused, yet Ramesh could see the concern in her eyes. The elephant's survival now depended on how quickly they could move him to a proper facility, where he could receive the care he desperately needed. "His wound is deep," Dr. Priya said softly, her voice breaking the stillness. "We can't risk transporting him in this state without proper stabilization. But we have to move him soon. The longer he stays here, the higher the risk of infection." Ramesh nodded, his mind racing. "I know, but how do we move him? He's too large, and with his injuries I'm afraid the journey could make things worse." Dr. Priya looked up at him, her gaze steady and reassuring. "We'll use a combination of tranquilizers and care. We have to be gentle, strategic. His survival depends on it." Her voice was filled with an unwavering determination, but there was no denying the gravity of the situation. The herd of elephants remained close by, watching with quiet intensity. They could sense the change in the air, the silent, invisible bond between them and Kavi. It was as if they too understood the importance of the next steps. The bond between humans and elephants was deeper than most realized. It was built on years of shared history and respect. And now, it was a silent alliance in the face of danger. As the moonlight bathed the scene in silver hues, Ramesh and Dr. Priya prepared to make their move, knowing full well that the road ahead would not be easy. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, the path forward uncertain but necessary. It was a race against time, and they were ready to fight for Kavi's life, no matter the cost. As Ramesh and Dr. Priya discussed the next steps, the silence was broken by the sudden sharp cry of an eagle overhead. The distant sound of animal calls echoed through the night, adding an eerie layer to the growing tension. Dr. Priya glanced at the sky before turning back to Ramesh. "We don't have much time," she said firmly. "We'll need to prepare Kavi for transport. The tranquilizers will help, but we need to move quickly once we get him sedated." Ramesh nodded, understanding the urgency in her voice. They had already lost precious time. "How far is the nearest wildlife sanctuary?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "It's about 2 hours on foot," Dr. Priya replied, wiping sweat from her brow. "But it might as well be 1,000 miles with Kavi's condition. We'll need to take it slow and we'll need help. We'll have to use ropes and make a makeshift sled of sorts." Ramesh's heart sank. It was going to be difficult, and every second would count. But he knew that they had no other choice. The thought of losing Kavi weighed heavily on him. The elephant had been a symbol of strength and resilience, and now it was up to them to provide that same strength in return. Ramesh quickly began to gather the necessary supplies from his bag: tranquilizers, bandages, ropes, and anything else they could use. He was moving mechanically, his mind occupied with the logistics of the task ahead, but a part of him remained fixed on the image of Kavi's gentle eyes and the soft breaths that escaped his massive body. With the plan in motion, Dr. Priya began preparing the tranquilizers, her movements steady and precise. "This will help him relax enough for us to transport him without further injury," she said, as she readied the injection. The night felt heavier now, the weight of their responsibility looming larger than ever before. As the tranquilizers were administered, the jungle fell eerily quiet, the air thick with anticipation. As the tranquilizers began to take effect, Kavi's body relaxed, his breathing slow and steady. The herd seemed to sense the shift, their bodies lowering, their trunks curling in silent reassurance. For a brief moment, there was peace in the chaos, but Ramesh knew that this was only the beginning. "Ramesh," Dr. Priya called softly, her voice steady but filled with the weight of the task at hand. "We need to move now. The tranquilizers won't last long. We have to get him to the sanctuary as quickly as possible. We'll make stops along the way to check his vitals and make sure we're not causing him more harm. Ramesh nodded, his body tense. The thought of moving such a large animal through the dense jungle filled him with dread, but he knew it was the only option. "I'll start preparing the ropes," he said, his voice a quiet murmur in the night. The herd of elephants remained in place, their movements subdued as they watched their fallen leader being prepared for transport. Ramesh and Dr. Priya worked quickly, the sounds of their actions echoing in the silent jungle. Every movement was measured and careful, as though any mistake could undo everything they had worked so hard for. With the ropes secured and Kavi gently hoisted onto the makeshift sled, Ramesh felt a brief moment of hope. They were ready. The journey ahead was treacherous, but it was a path they had no choice but to walk together. As they began the arduous journey through the jungle, the path seemed to grow more treacherous with every step. The terrain was rough, the thick underbrush making it difficult to move. Every branch seemed to catch on Kavi's makeshift sled, and every step felt as though it was carrying them further into danger. The air was thick with humidity, and Ramesh could feel his clothes sticking to his skin as they trudged through the dense forest. Every so often, they would stop to check on Kavi, adjusting his position and making sure he was comfortable. Dr. Priya was as focused as ever, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. The peaceful atmosphere of the night had been replaced by a feeling of foreboding. "We need to hurry," Dr. Priya said, breaking the silence. "If we don't get him to the sanctuary soon, we risk infection. His body is vulnerable, and the damage to his side is critical." Ramesh nodded, pushing forward with renewed determination. "I won't let him die here," he said, his voice strained. "We'll make it. We have to." With each step, the jungle seemed to close in around them, but Ramesh pressed on, determined to save Kavi, no matter what it took. Hours passed as Ramesh and Dr. Priya made their way through the jungle, the distance to the sanctuary slowly dwindling. The trek had been difficult, but Kavi's condition remained stable, thanks to their careful monitoring and the rest stops they had taken along the way. Despite the exhaustion setting in, Ramesh felt a sense of quiet hope beginning to grow within him. As the dawn light began to break through the trees, Ramesh allowed himself a moment to look back at the path they had traveled. The jungle was slowly waking up, the birds chirping in the trees above them. It was a new day, and with it came a sense of renewal. "We're almost there," Dr. Priya said, her voice filled with quiet relief. "Just a little further." Ramesh nodded, his tired eyes scanning the horizon. The sanctuary was in sight, its tall structures barely visible through the dense foliage. There was still so much to do, but for the first time in hours, Ramesh allowed himself to believe that they could save Kavi. The long journey had not been in vain. The wildlife sanctuary was a haven of hope, a place where Kavi could receive the proper care he so desperately needed. After what felt like an endless journey, the team had finally arrived. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a golden hue over the sanctuary's sprawling grounds. The air was thick with the scent of fresh grass and the distant sound of birds. But despite the peaceful surroundings, the journey wasn't over. Kavi was still unconscious, his massive body lying still on the makeshift sled, carefully transported through the jungle. Dr. Priya wasted no time. "We need to get him inside the medical facility immediately," she said, her voice filled with urgency but control. The sanctuary's staff was already waiting, prepared for the challenge ahead. They worked together, carefully unloading Kavi from the sled, moving him as gently as possible. Ramesh watched silently, his heart heavy with the weight of their success so far. But the true test would be how Kavi would respond to the advanced care awaiting him. His breathing was steady but shallow, and the tranquilizers had kept him sedated for the journey. "We've done everything we can for now," Dr. Priya said, as they lifted Kavi onto a stretcher. "The rest is up to him, but we need to keep a close eye on him, monitor for any complications." Ramesh nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his chest. He couldn't help but wonder if they had done enough to save this majestic creature. Would Kavi wake up? Would he be strong enough to survive the next steps of his recovery? The doubt gnawed at him, but he refused to let it take hold. The sanctuary was bustling with activity, but amidst the chaos, there was a sense of calm. The staff moved like a well-oiled machine, working to stabilize Kavi's condition. As Ramesh stood at the edge of the room, watching them work, he felt the overwhelming weight of responsibility. They were fighting for Kavi's life now, and there could be no turning back. Inside the medical facility, the lights were dim, and the air was cool. The team worked tirelessly, setting up equipment, preparing tools, and ensuring everything was in place. Dr. Priya and Ramesh hovered over Kavi, carefully adjusting the forward lines and monitoring his vitals. Time seemed to move in slow motion as they worked. The tranquilizers had worn off, but Kavi remained unconscious. His massive chest rose and fell slowly with each breath, his body still and vulnerable. Ramesh glanced at Dr. Priya, his concern palpable. "How long will it take for him to wake up?" he asked, his voice quiet but full of anxiety. "It's hard to say," Dr. Priya replied, her focus unwavering. "His body is exhausted. He's been through a lot. We just need to monitor his progress and give him time." Ramesh nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that settled in his chest. He had fought so hard to get Kavi here, to this moment of safety, but there was still so much unknown. He had seen elephants recover from injuries before, but none as severe as Kavi's. Would he be able to walk again? Would he ever return to the wild? The question lingered in Rameshan's mind as he watched Dr. Priya continue to work. The silence was broken only by the quiet beeping of machines and the occasional murmur of staff members as they carried out their tasks. Dr. Priya paused for a moment and looked up at Ramesh. "It's a waiting game now," she said softly. "But we'll do everything we can to make sure he pulls through." Ramesh could only nod. For now, all they could do was wait and hope. Hope that Kavi would awaken, that he would be strong enough to overcome this injury and reclaim his place in the wild. Hours passed, and Kavi's condition began to improve, albeit slowly. He remained unconscious, but his vitals were stable. Dr. Priya and Ramesh had taken shifts, constantly monitoring his progress and adjusting medications as needed. Despite the progress, a sense of unease lingered in the air. Kavi's massive body was still fragile, and the team wasn't sure when or if he would wake up. As the day wore on, Ramesh found himself growing restless. He couldn't sit still. Every minute felt like an eternity. He paced the medical room, checking on Kavi, and then checking the monitors again. His mind raced with possibilities, but there was little he could do but wait. "Dr. Priya," Ramesh asked, breaking the silence, "is there anything else we can do? I feel so helpless." Dr. Priya glanced up from her work, offering him a small, reassuring smile. "You've done more than most could ever do," she said. "But right now we just need patience. He's stable. We need to give him time to recover." Ramesh sighed and looked down at Kavi. His heart ached for the elephant. He had come so far, but the journey was far from over. There were still countless obstacles ahead. The road to recovery would not be easy, but Ramesh had already committed himself to Kavi's survival. He wouldn't abandon the elephant now. The soft sound of Kavi's breathing filled the room, a steady reminder that the fight was not over. Just as Ramesh began to feel the heaviness of the situation, something unexpected happened. Kavi's large trunk twitched slightly, and his ears flickered. Ramesh froze, his heart racing as he watched the subtle movements. Dr. Priya was by his side in an instant, her eyes scanning Kavi's vitals. "Is this it?" Ramesh asked, his voice trembling with hope. Dr. Priya nodded cautiously. "It looks like he's starting to wake up, but we need to be careful. His body is still weak." Ramesh leaned forward, watching Kavi's movements with bated breath. The elephant's large eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in hours, they made eye contact. Kavi's gaze was soft but filled with confusion. He blinked several times, as if unsure of his surroundings, before turning his head slightly to look at Ramesh. The room was still, save for the gentle beeping of the monitors. Dr. Priya took a step back, giving Ramesh a moment alone with Kavi. Ramesh stepped closer, his voice soft and reassuring. Kavi, you're safe now, you made it. Kavi's trunk twitched again, and his massive body shifted slightly. It was a small movement, but it was a sign that he was fighting to come back. As Kavi slowly regained his strength, the sanctuary staff continued to monitor him closely. His recovery was fragile, but each day brought small improvements. He was alert now, his eyes bright with awareness, but his body remained weak. Kavi's movements were slow, hesitant, as if he was unsure of his own strength. Ramesh stayed by his side, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and relief. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Kavi had made it this far. The bond between them, forged through their shared journey, felt stronger than ever. They had fought together to bring him here, and now it was time for him to continue the fight on his own terms. You're getting stronger, Ramesh whispered as he sat beside Kavi. We'll get through this together. Kavi's eyes met his once more, and for the first time, Ramesh saw a spark of recognition. The elephant was not just a patient, he was a survivor. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The days that followed Kavi's awakening were filled with slow, deliberate steps toward recovery. He had started to regain some strength, though his body was still fragile. The sanctuary staff continued to monitor him closely, adjusting medications and ensuring he received proper nutrition. Kavi's movements were still hesitant, but he was beginning to show signs of his former strength. He would occasionally lift his head, his eyes scanning the surroundings, as if testing the limits of his body. Ramesh stood by his side every day, watching with a mixture of hope and concern. The bond between them, forged through their long journey, seemed stronger than ever. Each small movement Kavi made felt like a victory, but Ramesh knew the road to full recovery would be long and difficult. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the sanctuary grounds, Dr. Priya approached Ramesh with a concerned expression. We've made progress, but we need to start thinking about his rehabilitation, she said, her voice serious. He's still too weak to return to the wild, and we can't risk rushing his recovery. Ramesh nodded, his thoughts racing. What does that mean for Kavi? How much longer will he need to stay here? Dr. Priya sighed, her gaze shifting to Kavi. It's hard to say. We need to start physical therapy, slowly. And even then he may never be fully fit to live in the wild again. It depends on how his body heals. The weight of her words settled heavily on Ramesh's shoulders. He had always believed that Kavi's journey would lead to a return to the wild, but now, that future seemed uncertain. They had saved him, yes, but the path ahead was filled with unknowns. Ramesh glanced at Kavi, who lay resting in the shade. The elephant's large eyes met his, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. There was still hope, but the future was no longer as clear as it once seemed. As the days turned into weeks, Kavi's recovery began to take shape. He slowly started standing more often, his legs trembling with the effort, but each time he stood, it was a small victory. His body had been through so much, but he was showing resilience, an inner strength that mirrored his previous life in the wild. The rehabilitation process was slow, but Dr. Priya and Ramesh worked tirelessly to help him regain his strength. Despite the progress, there were moments when the weight of the situation threatened to overwhelm Ramesh. Every time Kavi stumbled or struggled to lift his massive body, Ramesh's heart sank. He knew the path forward would be difficult, and the thought of Kavi never fully recovering haunted him. One day, as Kavi managed to take a few tentative steps on his own, Ramesh approached him, his heart pounding in his chest. "You're doing great, Kavi," he said softly, his voice full of pride and encouragement. The elephant's eyes flickered toward him, and for a moment, it felt as if Kavi understood. He gave a small tentative nudge with his trunk, a silent sign of thanks. But Dr. Priya's voice cut through the moment. "We need to keep pushing forward, Ramesh. Every day counts. But we can't risk rushing him. We have to be patient." Ramesh sighed, his gaze never leaving Kavi. "I know," he replied quietly. But inside, the weight of uncertainty remained. What if Kavi could never fully recover? What if the damage to his body was irreversible? Thought lingered in Ramesh's mind, but he pushed it aside. For now, all they could do was keep moving forward, step by step. As the weeks passed, the sanctuary became a place of healing, not only for Kavi but for Ramesh as well. He had thrown himself into the task of helping Kavi recover, spending every day by the elephant's side, offering support and encouragement. There were moments of frustration, times when Kavi seemed to stall in his progress, or when his body refused to cooperate. But there were also moments of joy, when Kavi's movements grew stronger and more confident. One afternoon as the sun began to set, Ramesh sat beside Kavi, watching the sky change from soft pinks and purples to deep blues. He had been reflecting on everything they had been through, from the initial rescue to the long journey to the sanctuary. It had been a grueling, exhausting ordeal, but Ramesh knew that they had come a long way. "Look at you," Ramesh murmured, his voice full of quiet awe. "You're getting stronger every day." Kavi looked at him, his massive eyes filled with a quiet understanding. For the first time in weeks, Ramesh felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. Kavi had come so far, and so had he. The journey wasn't over, but they had made it this far, and that was enough for now. Dr. Priya walked over, her face serious, but with a hint of optimism. "We're getting close, Ramesh. His progress is remarkable considering everything he's been through, but we still have a long road ahead." Ramesh nodded. "I know," he said, his gaze never leaving Kavi. "But I believe in him. I believe in both of us." The following days brought further progress, though Kavi's recovery was still delicate. The rehabilitation team continued to work with him, carefully encouraging him to take longer steps and strengthen his muscles. Kavi's movements were becoming less hesitant, more assured, though he still struggled with certain tasks. There were moments of frustration when he stumbled or hesitated, but he always pushed forward, never giving up. One day, Ramesh arrived to find Kavi standing, his large body supported by the medical staff. The elephant was taking slow, deliberate steps, his massive feet shifting on the soft earth beneath him. Ramesh's heart swelled with pride as he watched Kavi move. "Look at him," Ramesh whispered to Dr. Priya, who stood beside him observing the progress. "He's getting stronger every day." Dr. Priya nodded, her expression one of quiet pride. "He is. But we still need to be cautious. His muscles are still weak, and we can't rush him. Every day counts, Ramesh." Ramesh nodded in agreement, but the sight of Kavi standing, walking, was enough to give him hope. They had made it this far. Now it was just a matter of time. After months of careful rehabilitation, Kavi had come to a turning point. His body was stronger now, and his movements were more fluid. Though he wasn't yet fully recovered, he was no longer the fragile broken elephant that had arrived at the sanctuary. He had become a symbol of resilience, of the power of healing and time. Ramesh stood at the edge of the sanctuary, watching as Kavi took a few more confident steps, his trunk swaying gently in the breeze. It had been a long road, but they had made it. Ramesh felt a deep sense of fulfillment as he watched the elephant move freely, unencumbered by his past injuries. Dr. Priya approached, her face filled with quiet satisfaction. "He's ready, Ramesh. Not completely, but he's close." Ramesh nodded, his chest tight with emotion. "I never thought we'd get here. But we did." Dr. Priya smiled. "We did. And now, it's time for Kavi to begin his new life." As Kavi took another step, Ramesh felt a sense of peace. They had saved him, and he would now have the chance to return to the wild, where he truly belonged. The journey had been long, but in the end, it was worth it. The day had arrived. Kavi, after months of rehabilitation, was finally ready for the next step in his journey. His body was strong again, his movements confident and sure. The moment of truth had come. The sanctuary grounds were alive with anticipation as staff, and Ramesh watched from a distance. Today, Kavi would make the long-awaited return to the wild, his natural habitat. But the road to this point had been long and filled with uncertainty. Ramesh had dedicated so much of himself to Kavi's recovery. He had fought every day, hoping, praying that the elephant would regain his strength. Now, standing in front of the vast open space that stretched beyond the sanctuary, Ramesh knew this was the final moment, the moment that would define Kavi's future. Dr. Priya approached him, her expression both proud and apprehensive. "He's ready, Ramesh. He's stronger than he's been in months. But we need to be careful. He hasn't been in the wild for so long. He's going to face challenges." Ramesh nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. But we've given him everything we can. It's up to him now. I just want to see him free again." The gates of the sanctuary were open, revealing the wild landscape beyond, the open fields, the distant trees, the space that Kavi had once roamed. The wind stirred the grass, and the air felt electric with the promise of freedom. It was time. Ramesh turned to Kavi, his eyes filled with emotion. "Go on, Kavi. You're home now. You're free." As Kavi took a hesitant step forward, the sense of liberation was palpable. Every step was a reminder of the long journey that had brought them here, and the strength that had been needed to overcome the trials. Kavi was ready to reclaim his place in the world. Kavi's first few steps into the wild were tentative, as if he wasn't sure what to expect. He paused, sniffing the air, his large ears twitching at every new sound. The wind carried the familiar scents of the forest, the scent of earth, of grass, and of the life that had once been his. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the sounds of distant birds and rustling leaves filled the air. It was a world that he had known so well, and yet, after months of captivity, it felt strange, unfamiliar. Ramesh stood a few paces behind, watching with bated breath. His heart ached as he observed Kavi's cautious movements. He had always known that the wild was where Kavi truly belonged, but this moment was bittersweet. He had come to love the elephant like a family member, and now he was setting him free, knowing that he might never see him again. Dr. Priya was standing beside Ramesh, her expression a mix of hope and concern. "He's going to need time," she said softly. "We've given him a chance. Now it's up to him." Ramesh nodded, but remained silent, his gaze fixed on Kavi. The elephant's large form moved slowly through the grass, his trunk extending to touch the earth beneath him. It was as if he was reconnecting with the very soil that had once been his home. The sight of Kavi finally in the wild, free to roam once again, filled Ramesh's chest with a sense of pride and a quiet sadness. The journey had been long, but in this moment he knew they had done all they could for him. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange, Kavi moved further into the wilderness, his steps becoming more confident. The once hesitant creature was now exploring, his body strong and agile, reclaiming the natural grace he had lost during his time in captivity. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, and the trees swayed, their leaves shimmering in the fading light. Ramesh and Dr. Priya remained behind, watching as Kavi disappeared into the landscape. There was a sense of finality in the moment, a feeling that they were witnessing not just the end of a chapter, but the beginning of something new. Kavi was no longer the fragile, injured elephant they had rescued from the jungle. He was once again part of the wild, a force of nature. "It's hard to let go," Ramesh admitted quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But he's free now. He's where he belongs." Dr. Priya placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done something incredible, Ramesh. You gave him a chance. Now let him live it." Ramesh nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the horizon, where Kavi had disappeared into the wild. There was a bittersweet feeling in his chest, joy for the elephant's freedom, and sadness for the bond they had forged. But above all, there was hope. Hope that Kavi would thrive, that he would live the life he was meant to live. The days that followed were a quiet reflection of the journey they had all been through. Kavi had adapted to his new life in the wild, moving with ease and confidence, but there was still a sense of longing in Ramesh's heart. He visited the sanctuary each day, hoping for a glimpse of the elephant he had worked so hard to save. He would stand at the edge of the wilderness, his eyes scanning the horizon, waiting for a sign that Kavi was thriving. It wasn't long before Ramesh got his answer. One morning, as he stood at the boundary of the sanctuary, he saw a familiar figure in the distance. Kavi, his massive form silhouetted against the rising sun, stood at the edge of the forest, looking back at him. Their eyes met across the distance, and for a brief moment, it was as if time stood still. Ramesh's heart swelled with emotion as he watched Kavi slowly turn and walk deeper into the forest. He had made it. The elephant was free, living the life he was always meant to live. Ramesh had given him the chance to return home, and now Kavi was flourishing in his natural habitat. With a sense of peace in his heart, Ramesh turned and walked back toward the sanctuary. The journey was over. Kavi was where he belonged. Ramesh stood at the edge of the sanctuary, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the land. The journey had been long, filled with challenges and uncertainty, but it had been worth it. Kavi had made it. He had returned to the wild, where he belonged. Ramesh had given everything to ensure the elephant's survival, and in the end, it was Kavi's strength that had carried him through. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Ramesh felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been difficult, but it had led to this moment, the moment when Kavi was truly free. He had fought for this, and now, Kavi would live the life he was always meant to live. "I'll never forget you, Kavi," Ramesh whispered to the wind. "You'll always be a part of me." With one last glance at the wild landscape, Ramesh turned and walked back toward the sanctuary, knowing that the elephant he had saved was now living the life he deserved, free, wild, and strong. Months had passed since Kavi's release into the wild, and yet Ramesh found himself returning to the sanctuary every so often, unable to fully let go of the bond he had formed with the elephant. The wild had become Kavi's new home, but Ramesh's thoughts often drifted back to the days of their struggle together. He had witnessed the transformation from a fragile, injured creature to a powerful, free animal. It was something that still amazed him every day. The connection they shared was something deeper than words could describe. It wasn't just about saving a life, it was about giving that life a chance to be itself again. And now, as Ramesh stood at the edge of the sanctuary, gazing into the vast wilderness beyond, he realized that Kavi was no longer the elephant that had come to him in need. He was his own being now, living out his days in the wild, free to roam and thrive. Ramesh had come to understand that this journey, though difficult, had been about letting go. Letting go of the dependency that had formed between them, allowing Kavi to return to the world he was meant to inhabit. There were no guarantees, no promises. The wild would present its own challenges, its own dangers. But Kavi was strong, and he had the freedom to face those challenges on his terms. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow across the landscape, Ramesh knew that his work was done. Kavi had made it. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few months settle into the quiet serenity of the moment. The wild stretched before him, alive with possibilities. And Kavi, wherever he was living the life he deserved. Days turned into weeks, and Kavi continued to thrive in the wild. The herd that had once surrounded him, now bolstered by his presence, welcomed him back as if he had never been gone. Ramesh received reports from the sanctuary staff, all of them filled with praise for Kavi's resilience and ability to adapt. The stories told of Kavi's return to the heart of the forest, where he had once wandered as a young calf, now fully matured and strong. Ramesh couldn't help but smile at the updates, though a part of him still felt the pull to visit. He knew that Kavi had his own life to live now, a life that would be filled with challenges and triumphs of his own making. But as the months passed, Ramesh began to feel a sense of peace that he hadn't anticipated. The uncertainty of the past had been replaced by a quiet trust that Kavi was where he was meant to be. One afternoon, as Ramesh sat at the edge of the sanctuary, the soft sound of elephants trumpeting in the distance filled the air. He didn't need to see them to know what was happening. It was Kavi, calling to the herd. It was a sound of triumph, of belonging. The call echoed through the trees, and Ramesh felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Kavi had made it. He had truly returned to the wild. As time passed, Ramesh began to realize that his life had been forever changed by his connection with Kavi. The elephant had been more than just a patient to him. He had been a companion, a friend, and a symbol of resilience. Watching Kavi return to the wild fully healed and free had given Ramesh a sense of fulfillment that was difficult to put into words. The bond they shared would always be a part of him. Yet, Ramesh had come to understand that letting go was an important part of love. Kavi had found his place in the world, and Ramesh had found peace in knowing that. The wild was where Kavi belonged, not in a sanctuary or in captivity, but in the freedom to roam and live his life as he chose. One evening, as Ramesh watched the sun dip below the horizon, he thought about the future. He thought about how Kavi, in his own way, had taught him something valuable: the importance of freedom, of living in harmony with the world around you, and of giving others the space they need to grow. The journey had been long, but in the end, it had been worth it. Kavi had not only survived, he had thrived. And Ramesh had found his own peace, knowing that his role in Kavi's life had been a pivotal one. One day, while walking through the sanctuary, Ramesh received a phone call. It was from one of the wildlife researchers who had been following Kavi's movements in the wild. There was excitement in the researcher's voice as they reported a remarkable discovery. Kavi had become a leader in the herd, a protector of the younger elephants. The once injured creature had found his strength not just in his own survival, but in guiding others. Ramesh smiled as he listened to the report. This was the culmination of everything they had worked for, not just survival, but true return to the wild, where Kavi could fulfill his natural role in the herd. It was a triumph, not just for Kavi, but for everyone who had been a part of his journey. As Ramesh hung up the phone, he felt a profound sense of pride. Kavi had made it. He had not only survived, but had flourished in the wild. His journey had come full circle. And now, he was exactly where he was meant to be. Ramesh had known that Kavi was strong, but hearing this news filled him with awe. The elephant had not only healed physically, but had also regained his place in the natural order. Kavi was thriving, leading the way for others. As the seasons changed and the years passed, Ramesh continued his work with wildlife conservation, but he often found himself thinking of Kavi. He had seen the elephant transform from a fragile, injured animal into a powerful leader of the herd. The memories of their time together remained with him, a constant reminder of the impact they had both made on each other's lives. One last time, Ramesh visited the sanctuary's edge, looking out into the wilderness where Kavi had first stepped free. He knew it was time to move on, but there was a sense of peace in his heart, knowing that Kavi had found his place. The elephant had returned to the wild, thriving in a world that was once again his. Ramesh stood at the boundary of the sanctuary, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon once more, casting the world in a soft golden light. The wild was a place of freedom, of challenges, and of new beginnings. And Kavi, wherever he was living it. The years passed, and life moved forward for both Ramesh and Kavi. Though Ramesh continued his work with wildlife conservation, he often found himself looking back at the time he had spent with Kavi. It was a journey that had changed both of their lives, and though they were no longer in direct contact, their bond remained unbreakable. Ramesh thought back to the days of uncertainty, the long nights in the jungle, and the quiet moments with Kavi, when it felt like they were the only two beings in the world. There had been fear, exhaustion, and doubt, but there had also been hope, a hope that had driven him to never give up on the elephant. He could still remember the first moment he had laid eyes on Kavi, the fragile, injured creature in need of care. Now Kavi was a part of the wild, thriving as he was meant to be. One evening, as Ramesh walked through the sanctuary, he received a phone call. It was from a wildlife researcher who had been tracking Kavi's movements in the wild. The news was both surprising and heartwarming. Kavi had not only found his place in the herd, but he had become a protector. He had formed a deep bond with the younger elephants, guiding them through the challenges of the wild. He was not just surviving, he was thriving, leading the way for the next generation. Ramesh smiled as he listened to the update, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. The journey had been worth it. Kavi had found his true calling. As Ramesh stood at the edge of the sanctuary, looking out over the wild landscape where Kavi now lived, he felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had been long, filled with trials and triumphs, but it had led them to this moment. Kavi was exactly where he belonged. The elephant had found his place in the world, and Ramesh had played a part in that. It wasn't just about saving a life, it was about giving Kavi the freedom to live his own story. Ramesh had always known that the wild was where Kavi belonged. But the reality of it, seeing Kavi thrive, hearing stories of his leadership in the herd, brought a sense of finality to the journey. The bond between them had been forged in struggle, but it was now cemented in something greater. Kavi had become a symbol of resilience, of survival, and of the wild spirit that could not be tamed. Though Ramesh knew he would never forget Kavi, he also knew that his role had been fulfilled. He had given the elephant a chance at life, and in doing so, had rediscovered his own sense of purpose. The sanctuary, with its peaceful grounds and vast wilderness, would always hold a special place in his heart, but it was now Kavi's domain, a place where the elephant could roam free. Months later, Ramesh received another update about Kavi. The elephant had continued to thrive, becoming a leader in the herd and guiding younger elephants through the wild. His presence in the forest had become vital, and Ramesh could not have been prouder. He had heard stories of Kavi's encounters with other wildlife, how he had protected his herd from danger, and helped them find food and water. It was the role of a true leader, and Kavi had stepped into it with grace. Ramesh often thought back to the times when he had doubted Kavi's survival, when the odds had seemed insurmountable. But now, the elephant's strength was undeniable. He had overcome the challenges of captivity, of injury, and of uncertainty. And now, he was a part of something greater, a thriving herd that depended on him. Ramesh realized that the wild, in all its unpredictability and danger, was a place of immense beauty and power. It was where Kavi truly belonged. And even though Ramesh no longer had a direct role in Kavi's life, he knew that the bond they shared would never fade. It was a bond built on trust, love, and mutual respect. One afternoon, Ramesh received a letter from the wildlife research team, reporting that Kavi had been spotted near the outskirts of the forest, standing tall and proud as he surveyed the land. It was a sight to behold, and the research team had captured the moment on camera. The image of Kavi, his trunk raised high, his large ears flapping gently in the wind, filled Ramesh's heart with pride. He had always known that Kavi would become a leader, but seeing it in action brought a deep sense of fulfillment. It was a reminder that the wild was a place of both beauty and danger, but it was also a place of opportunity. Kavi had found his place in the world, not by surviving, but by thriving and adapting to his surroundings. He had become a force of nature, leading the way for others. And Ramesh knew that the elephant's journey was far from over. As Ramesh looked at the photo of Kavi, standing tall in the wild, he felt a quiet sense of peace. The elephant had become something greater than either of them could have imagined. Kavi had not only survived, he had flourished. Years later, Ramesh returned to the sanctuary one final time. It was no longer just a place of work for him, but a place of reflection. He stood at the edge of the land, looking out over the wild where Kavi's legacy lived on. There had been challenges, but Kavi's journey had been a triumph. The elephant had returned to the wild and had not only survived, but had thrived. Ramesh could now look back with a sense of peace, knowing that Kavi had found his true home. He had witnessed the miracle of Kavi's recovery and freedom, and now he understood that the most important thing he had done was give the elephant the chance to live his own life. The wild had been his home all along. Ramesh had helped Kavi find his way back, but in the end, it was the elephant who had created his own story. As Ramesh stood there, the wind brushing through the trees and the sounds of the forest surrounding him, he knew that the legacy of Kavi, the mighty elephant he had saved, would live on, not just in the wilderness, but in his heart forever.